Hi Avnish, thank you for joining us today.
Hi Yogesh, thank you so much.
Please, I would start off with you telling us a little bit about Boheco's journey and its entry into the hemp space and how you guys as a single entity have created this ecosystem.
Definitely, thank you so much, Yogesh. So as Yogesh has already mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders at Bombay Hemp Company. We started off in 2013 with primarily a hypothesis around the questions lying in and around cannabis. That we have this plant which is very indigenous, which has so much potential, and why is it that there's no real conversation around it? Why is it that there's no real narrative in terms of its even its Ayurvedic use or its industrial use, etc. When we kind of were at the stage where the world had adopted turmeric latte, the very haldi doodh that we didn't like suddenly became a $10 expensive drink, and we all started appreciating it. Something very similar happened with hemp and cannabis. During our trips to Uttarakhand in our college days, we saw a lot of the kind of local women use hemp fiber, hemp seeds for the subsistence purpose. And as we kind of started understanding that there is a subsistence use, we also figured out brands like the Body Shop had products that were being made from this plant. So that kind of put things in perspective for us, that there is a subsistence plant use versus a global conglomerate kind of using the same knowledge that exists. So we were at the cusp of it. We believe that, saying that we are also exposed to the Western world to a larger extent, and we had the great opportunity to travel India. So we thought it was a great time to at least establish the hypothesis that why is there no conversation around it. And moving on from there, it started primarily with research and development, looking at the fact that there was an ocean of cannabis in India, but not a drop of that water that we could drink. So we needed to actually figure out what is Indian cannabis, how do we kind of categorize it, how do we chemically study it, how do we get the requisite permissions to even do that, and most importantly understand the fact that is cannabis as a plant blanket banned by the government? Is that perception true? That was the main question that was to be asked. And I think that's what continuously Boheco has been doing. And we're very proud of the fact that now it's not only Boheco, it's a lot of other companies doing a bunch of other things within the ecosystem to create a real narrative. Whether it's kind of developing sanitary pads using hemp as a fiber, or whether it is developing an arthritis based product in that case. So as the applications are huge, the objective was always to have more companies, and not necessarily number, but in terms of either from a scientific perspective in an application sense, or even from an education and activism perspective that would be there. So our approach is the attempt to our approach has always been to be able to be wholesome, try to include as many stakeholders as possible, and most importantly the government in that case. So yes, it has been an exciting journey so far, and I think we're pretty happy with the fact that India has reached wherever it has. This definitely has light years to go ahead, but it's a start.
That's a very inspiring journey, and how I like how this dialogue has led to so many value propositions and creating a whole new market here. And I feel you are the right person heading research and development at Boheco at the cusp of affairs. Avnish, tell us a little bit about the well-being piece that you are focusing on as part of Boheco Life.
Correct. So as we were doing our research, there were obvious utility-based concepts that revolve around hemp. Whether it was related to building an industry based on fiber as a raw material, industry based on seed as a food, Ayurvedic nutraceutical ingredient, or the leaf and the flower as a pure health and wellness kind of outlook. We all kind of in the due course of business realize that certain industries are more valuable, they contribute in a larger way to human society, and would hence have larger impact. So the well-being, Boheco life well-being is a concept that predominantly revolves around human health and wellness, but the objective is that one of the best impacts hemp and cannabis can have on mankind is on its health. Now, whether that is health related to chronic illnesses, health related to just specific nutraceutical use of products as supplements, or whether it's related to the mental health or a very important aspect of life that we do not deal very well with, which is things like stress, anxiety, etc. So that is the idea, that to focus on the human health and wellness aspect, and to be able to leverage what has been present in our authoritative texts such as the Rig Veda, the Ayurveda, how cannabis has been mentioned for its use, even for its toxicity, which means that cannabis is not necessarily good for everything, or if not done in the right doses, getting that right, and at the same time eventually figuring out that today we live in a modern world where requisite science, requisite clinical trials, demonstrable proof is necessary. So our attempt is to kind of merge the Western way of thinking and the analytical side along with the traditional Ayurvedic medicines that are there, which is, I think, where even curcumin went with haldi, and where kind of specific opioids went within the opium plant. So that's where we eventually see the evolution of cannabis, and this is our attempt to bring that to the forefront.
Okay. I mean, that's very interesting, as you say, because we are not just copying, say, the West. We're just taking Western techniques, looking at our history and the Ayurvedic texts, combining those and coming up with a juxtaposure to launch products for the Indian consumer. That's great. And is this, what are the challenges that you have faced on the way? Because it's such been a taboo, and you being the first ones to do this in the country, how has that been?
Correct. So I think that's one of the most interesting questions, because the biggest value add that I think anyone can do to cannabis today is from a perception value point of view, because there are certain misconceptions which might not necessarily be true, arguably very false to a large extent. Secondly, when there is miseducation and misinformation, the first step is kind of de-education, and then it begins with re-education. So our point was to kind of bring a sense of magic and aha moment in the education process, which can help people relate to it better. For example, going into a meeting wearing a hemp shirt or wearing a pair of hemp denims, and letting the bureaucrat know that, listen, what I'm wearing is coming from the cannabis plant. Do you think you can get high with this? Do you think there can be anything, toxic or harmful with it? It's just they would never think that you could make these things with cannabis. For example, today we have a hemp home that is built by somebody in the hemp community in Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand, which kind of gives people an aha moment that, oh my God, this plant that we used to literally burn can make a super insulating home. So using these kind of aha techniques, I would say, we had a member of parliament by the name of Tathagat Satpathy. Back in the day, he was representing Biju Janata Dal, wear a hemp kurta to the parliament. And imagine, he spoke about it on the parliament floor, that today I am wearing cannabis. And he also happened to tweet about it. So that kind of changed the narrative, at least. It changes the conversation, offers something else a space to be there beyond that atypical interpretation of, somebody with a Bob Marley t-shirt who's probably working on it. So that was the interesting part, yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's really impressive, and it's not just the narrative, right? I hear that it's just a natural journey that you have diversified into so many products, and the passion I hear from you. And just speaking of the hemp shirt that you are wearing, white in color, why don't you tell us about the B label and the lifestyle brand that followed the well-being brand that you have created for Boheco?
Definitely. So I think for the benefit of all, I'll kind of contextualize our journey from 2013 till date. So when we started off, there was literally only one part of the hemp plant that we could legitimately work with, which was the fiber of the hemp plant. whether it's the hurd or the bast fiber. So we initially started off by trading some fiber, buying some fiber from locals in Uttarakhand, trying to figure out some weaving around it, whether there could be any mechanical processes or any handloom processes. We started kind of connecting this fiber ecosystem with a designer ecosystem, because we knew if it had to become cool, if it had to become relevant, it had to come from the top. And that's where kind of our education really helped us, because some of us have a background in advertising, some of us have a background in the legal side, so we could kind of put 2 and 2 together and say that this is where it needs to go. We started off with B-Label as a lifestyle brand, predominantly to let people know that cannabis is not only smoke. It is a lot more, and the opportunity is, even the bigger brands in the world today are using hemp as a sustainable raw material. So why not kind of reinvent that? So we started that brand in 2015. B-Label still continues. It has its own set of collections, its own set of designers. And at the same time, we have a hemp fabric lab that collaborates with other designers beyond B-Label for them to utilize this hemp fabric. For example, I think for the last 3 or 4 years, the best fashion show at NIFT India has predominantly come from hemp material. It's that relevant a story that the future of fashion is looking at these unique materials. And like, it is essential to know that not everything was started off to create a big brand or to create a lot of money. That wasn't the objective. That's where I think Boheco was unique in terms of its ability to create this ecosystem, because you cannot evaluate everything on the same metric. And that was also the other problem why there were no hemp companies before, which is very important to think that why isn't it that nobody did it till then? Because it required that non-selfish approach to a certain extent. It could not only be viewed from a specific business lens, and which might not appeal to majority of the audiences. So it probably needed foolish people to behave like geniuses in some way to do it.
I like your humility there. But where is this constant and relentless innovation happening? Out of curiosity, like, where was all of this innovation happening relentlessly?
Correct. So I think the innovation process was very organic for us. It started with first growing cannabis, figuring out land races from different parts of India and growing and seeing what different varieties have. What is the chemical composition, what is the fiber content, etc. And again, a process like that is long term. When we talk about innovation, I think we usually kind of stop talking about failure. But it is, I think, the #1 kind of factor in innovation. So at Boheco Innovation Lab, we've actually tried different materials to create a bioplastic. We've also created like 95% hemp-based ethanol, which could actually be carbon positive in a certain way if used correctly. But while we kind of innovate, we also start figuring out the lack of business prospect around some of these innovations. Something cannot be scaled for certain reasons, something there's a technological issue, something might be a regulatory blockage. So that's where you kind of start also understanding the process of innovation and the cost of innovation in certain areas. And then gradually, as we kind of move towards where we are today, we realize that we need to have certain focus areas. And now all our innovation focus is around trying to develop unique health and wellness products, and at the same time work on the seed technology, which is the agronomics, the cultivation techniques, etc. So yes, it started off in a very organic process, which is like, let's go and kind of fetch things and figure out how it works, which I think is also a necessity at a certain stage for an innovator. But the faster the innovator kind of figures out that why some things will not work, the better the process becomes. So it's been a very, very, I think, engaging journey from the learning perspective.
Thank you so much for answering that. And I think you have the innovation lab in place just to cater to the innovation company wide.
Exactly, exactly. And also engage with engineering students, for example. So, for example, one of the first projects we were working in the innovation lab was with Tarun Jami, And today Tarun has his own company called Green Labs, Green Jam Labs, I believe, which has developed, he's gone ahead, completed a PhD in that. Of course, that's all by himself. And he's created an agrocrete material that uses agricultural biomass, fly ash, and a bunch of other components. So there has been a great success there. There are a couple of other companies that have developed interesting materials like biocomposites. So yes, not everything that you can innovate you can scale today. So that is also something that we learned. So it's not necessarily only for Boheco, it's for people to try different things with legally available hemp material. I think that's the better way to kind of put it.
No, that's great. What's like the role of technology here for this constant innovation that's taking place?
I think technology definitely plays the biggest role, because if we look at the way Ayurveda presents hemp or cannabis, and if we are able to kind of reduce that science to something that Western medicine also accepts, that whole journey of analytical process is where science and technology is going to be key. So whether we are talking about technology in agronomics, which is like, you know, actual ground level technology of what sowing density to have, what kind of fertilizer to use, or what kind of organic manure do we use, all the way up to technology that would be useful at a farm level for threshing the fiber, separating the fiber, decorticating the fiber, whether we're talking about application of chemistry, mechanical, or different types of sciences and engineering that would be required. I believe India has a strong base for this already in different ecosystems, and then when we come eventually to probably the most valuable piece of it, which is the health and wellness piece of technology, where we're talking about extraction methodology, or we're talking about some standardization on the final product itself, testing methods, analytical techniques. These are, I think, going to be cornerstones of how the policy development also happens, because you cannot know how good or bad something is without actually testing it. So that, I believe, is the first step that really all the companies need to take seriously first, because it's kind of an industry where self-regulation is going to be probably more necessary than a lot of other industries. And at the same time, make sure that there are certain benchmarks and parameters and qualification criterias for these products to actually make sense.
Okay. I mean, yes, apart from that, also risk taking from entrepreneurs like yourself to forgo the time and develop the industry in such a fantastic way with so many moving pieces. That's very impressive. I'm not going to take a lot of your time, Avnish, but I want to know a little bit more about what your thoughts are about the future of the hemp industry in India. And what challenges have you faced? The biggest challenges that you have faced till date being in it?
Yeah, I think I'd start with the challenges. I think the number one challenge has been to be able to push through some of the legislation the government has kind of brewed on for a long time. And in this case, we might be talking about a state government or even the central government. Sometimes there is that initial political will, but then kind of things slow down, and then we have different surprises like COVID, and you know, then the whole kind of narrative building takes a sidestep, and then we have a part of the media that talks beautifully about cannabis and a part of the media that also vilifies it. We have seen that extensively during the last 2 years with what happened with certain celebrity actors or their kids, without actual proof maybe in some of those cases as well. So that also kind of sometimes sidelines the larger narrative and brings out what we would refer to as a toxic narrative for the industry overall. So I think those are the harsh realities that we have to deal with. And as far as opportunity goes, I think India is going to be, like what it has done in every other thing, an amazing follower. We are definitely going to follow the rest of the world in terms of how they look at demystifying the plant and deregulating it to a certain extent. we are going to see a major shift in American policy, maybe this year or the coming year with the new government there, of how they will regulate the recreational use at a federal level. And I think as America being one of the top signatories of the UN ODC, that will affect how global regulation also looks at it. Eventually, what India needs to, I think, the realization that will happen internally, or it might come from outside, is that, oh my God, this is part of Ayurveda and we need to own the narrative. We need to have an Ayurvedic Himalayan hemp cream selling in Costco. We need to have that kind of a Himalayan hemp salt selling in a Walmart or a Carrefour or something. That we got that with haldi to a certain extent, right? We smelt blood there and we realized this is our opportunity. And I think this will take some time to smell that blood, because also there needs to be enough blood to be smelt by the big boys. So it is companies like Boheco and 100 other companies that kind of bring the industry. You guys would be very aware that it's only valuable when it becomes like maybe a 500 crore, 600 crore industry. For the big boys to really think about it and say, you know what, let's do a couple of products in this area. Let's mainstream this. Let's kind of bring it to a lot more people, because we believe the government is now in acceptance that A, this is non-toxic and definitely scientifically part of what we're saying. So that's where I think the opportunity lies for everybody in this field.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much. Forerunners, market creators, and risk takers. Cheers to that, and thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, man. Thank you so much.